Hi, I'm Dan Egan.
And I'm Father Greg.
Join us for our new show right here on Catholic TV.
Why We Worship.
It's coming straight at you.
In order to appreciate the Mass in all its beauty, there's a couple terms that we have to become familiar with. The lamb that was sacrificed was something that was reserved for God. It was the best sheep in their flocks, and yet that would be the one that would save them. Now, wouldn't it be great if there were such a vehicle of God's grace and favor? Today, there is one. It's the Mass.
Welcome back to Why We Worship, the Advent series, A Journey to Bethlehem. I'm Dan Egan.
And I'm Father Greg.
And it's great to be with you here on Catholic TV. Advent, Father, is flying by. Can't believe it's week 3 already.
We're all beyond the halfway point.
And it's amazing. I mean, the pressure's on, the weather is turning, it's going to be Christmas soon. I haven't got my Christmas shopping. I've been here on Catholic TV learning about Advent.
Yeah, I won't begrudge you for it. It's a worthy thing, you know. In this third week of Advent, we're going to start looking at the close proximity to Christmas. I mean, we have the third Advent candle lit, which is rose-colored, as you see in the Advent wreath behind us. The Church has traditionally called it Gaudete Sunday, which means rejoice. It's the command, rejoice.
They're not just asking for us to rejoice, they're telling us to rejoice.
All right, just like a good mother will tell her kid to eat his veggies, And the same way the Church is telling us, you got to know what's important to rejoice about. And this is that time. We're in the final stretch.
And of course, we've been learning all about the different things we can rejoice about here in Advent on Catholic TV. For the last 2 weeks, we've been unpacking Advent. We've been talking about the Visitation, the Annunciation, and more importantly, the characters in the Gospel stories that are bringing this to life for us in this important season. And
a couple of the characters we want to look at this time through I think especially St. Joseph. You can't give too much emphasis to St. Joseph. A lot's going on in that man's life. The Church treasures his presence. And St. John the Baptist.
St. Joseph, he really carries himself with a lot of poise. He's not freaking out. There's a lot on this guy's shoulders.
He does, He's all action. He's all action. He doesn't say a single word in all of the Gospels. That's kind of significant. And so, despite that silence, he's a mover and he's a doer, and that's for God, that was good enough.
And how many of us during the Christmas season, when we're so busy, there's so much to do, it's often better just to do it.
Along with the doing it, before the doing comes the listening. I got to know what to do. And so St. Joseph, we can't forget, was the best of listeners. He was hearing stuff from God. It sounded like conflicting signals. Where am I going? The angel's telling me to take Mary's my spouse, but she's already with child. All that difficult stuff to digest. He listened, though, with the ears of faith.
And in the middle of all this, we have the census. So he's about to become a father, but yet he's so obedient to the way of the world.
Exactly. And we're going to get into that shortly. It's all about trust. Trust, you could say, is the theme of this third week of Advent that we're going to speak about here. And, just as I, trusted you that this would be a good idea to come on this show, so far I'm not regretting it. We're going to look at the role of trust in our lives in Advent.
So much to unfold right here on Why We Worship on Catholic TV, the Advent series, Father, and the journey to Bethlehem. So don't go away. Hi, I'm Dan Egan.
And I'm Rainey Schwartz.
And this is Extreme Faith.
A view from the pew.
Rainey, it sure is fun each week sitting down exploring our faith together. And you know what I say? Come to Mass, there's room in the pew for you.
The one who walks the earth is never as strong as the one in your heart. And Dan, if people want to reach us, they can reach us at SoundCloud.com at Extreme Faith Podcast and also on Twitter at Extreme Faith Pod.
And you can always log on to ExtremeFaithPodcast.com. So we'll see you next time on Extreme Faith.
A view from the pew.
Welcome back to Why We Worship. And Father, here, week 3 of Advent. Of course, we're talking about God acting through man-made events. The census. I mean, Joseph must have been going crazy, right? He's getting all these messages from the angels. He's got to get his ready. And all of a sudden, he's got to move the whole show down the road.
It must have been really hard. You put yourself in the shoes of the characters, of the people involved. And here, especially St. Joseph, because he's trying to get things as ready as possible for the birth of the Son of Mary. of whom he's supposed to be the foster child, and now all his plans get thwarted. I mean, as a guy, you know how bad it is for your plans to get completely crushed. Okay, so now where do we go? No family or friends are going to be able to attend the birth of their child.
It's amazing. So, bringing that home into our everyday life, there's so many things that happen to us in the course of a day, a week, a month. We might lose a client, lose a job. Things change, but yet God is acting. God's still faithful. And that's what I love about this whole thing right here is God's still going to be faithful. The events of history are not going to change just because of a little drama in his life.
Right, and that's a big takeaway for us. We have to learn how to be able to take away from the example of St. Joseph a real poise and reflectiveness toward the adverse things that happen to us, trusting that God's still in charge. You see, because St. Joseph, he had to make that leap of faith. God, I know you're still in charge here. I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm going to Bethlehem. I'm going to pick up and move despite all the difficulties, which we're going to talk about now.
Really, he's got a mule, right? An open road, and his beautiful wife, and off they go.
And it was probably the worst time to do that, First of all, half the world up and leaves in order to go to their hometowns for the census, which, no Jew was in favor of this thing. It was just the Roman emperor in some far-off palace saying, I would just like to know how many people are in my empire, and everyone pulling their hair out because now they have to move, and he's never going to visit or anything. And so, first of all, the injustice that everyone felt because of that. And secondly, Mary, as you mentioned, she's, 8.5 months pregnant. Who knows? This is a long journey down to Bethlehem, and poor Mary, she's gonna be suffering, not in a nice, smooth highway car ride, but on a bouncing donkey.
It's amazing. I'm of the rebellious sort, Father. I don't like to be told what to do, and I'm defiant.
Right.
I'm defiant. So many times I'm at odds with being told what to do by authority, and yet this is exactly the example that he lays out for us.
That is what comes to a head when he comes to Bethlehem. It's like, I have finally done my part. I'm obedient to God. Now things should start to, the dominoes should start to fall in my direction. Except for the fact of what we know happens, okay? So no, you know what? You're the last one to come into town, Joseph. It looks like you got the memo late or something. And so there's no room, and things just go from bad to worse in his eyes.
And yet there's so much happening here, as we're going to learn later in the show. The wise men are en route. The shepherds are coming to town. The big party's about to happen.
God's making all roads lead to Bethlehem. Like we say, all roads lead to Rome. That day, all roads led to Bethlehem. And he's making all the pieces come together amazingly.
And up next, right here on Why We Worship on Catholic TV, we're going to learn about what the popes have to say about this amazing event.
Welcome back to our Why We Worship Advent series, Journey to Bethlehem. This is the segment where we explore what the popes have said throughout the ages. And we're going to be looking at, on Gaudete Sunday, this third Sunday of Advent, what they've said about living in joy together. So communion with our neighbor, love of neighbor, comes out in a very pronounced way in the teachings of the church. We'll go into a couple of the declarations, a couple of the speeches that the popes have said concerning that. And one of even a little further back than Pope Benedict or St. John Paul is Pope John the 23rd, way back in 1962. He says it in this way, speaking of those familiar terms of history and the journey together. In Bethlehem, he says, we find a new beginning in the course of human history. New beginning, wow. That's at the same time tied to our own actions. How's that? Well, he continues. In Bethlehem, we find the motives to positively change the social reality we live in. Vanquishing egoism, awareness of the needs of our neighbor, and the law of forgiveness. the law of forgiveness applied generously, and the triumph of perfect fraternity. See, Pope John was very aware of the needs of people, especially the poor. And so, balancing out all the goodness of the earth, not only spiritual goods, even temporal goods, was a great inspiration for him. They tried to communicate somehow what the church calls the universal destination of goods, right? Sometimes the saints have said, what you have for living with decency, attending to your needs, everything else belongs to the poor. Sounds a little radical to us, but that's the sense that Christianity's always had. I have stuff. God gives it to me. He allows me to have possessions. And yes, private property is a good thing, an important and essential thing. And yet, it's mine to administer. It's mine to not hoard, but to tend to everyone around me, because I'm a Christian, because I care about my neighbor. And so, his very interesting phrase, in Bethlehem we find the motives to change the social reality we live in. It's hard to think of it that way. I never thought of Bethlehem that way, at least as a little kid, but when you start to reflect upon it, it starts to hit home. Christ was born in poverty. He was born not having stuff, not even having a hotel room. He had a stable or a cave. And this awareness helps us to turn to our neighbor. I have what I need. I can help out too. Now, moving on to very recent times, Pope Francis has a word or two to contribute on this score. On this day, he says, referring to Gaudete Sunday, this day has a special charm. It makes us experience deeply the meaning of history. We rediscover the beauty of being on a journey. It's a universal pilgrimage towards a common goal. That's beautiful. It's all of us together journeying towards a common goal. Not each with their own goal, which is what people tend to think. Oh, I want this and you want that, and if we clash in the middle, that's too bad. No, there's a goal we all long for. We all long for happiness, which is only satisfied and found in God. He continues, this universal pilgrimage toward the common goal in the Old Testament, that's Jerusalem. That's the common goal. You know, for the religiously minded Jew, all roads lead to Jerusalem. You know, kind of like the counterpart of that phrase, all roads lead to Rome. Well, in Jerusalem, that's where the temple of the Lord rises. For us, the new Jerusalem is our goal. This final union and communion with God all together is the goal we strive for. You know, a wise priest once said, you can't get to heaven alone. That's very beautiful. And that's very true, I think. No one gets to heaven alone. You always have to drag a whole bunch of people with you. Because God entrusts us with bringing other people with us. And so this is a calling. These great encouragements from the recent popes have called out to us to take a look around us. Am I truly seeking for union with my neighbor? Am I caring for them in body and in soul as Christ himself desires of me?
Welcome back to Catholic TV, the Advent series right here, the Why We Worship show. And Father, as we bring this into our everyday life, you know, for people to think about in their homes and these characters of the Gospels, you've been talking a lot about the herald, John the Baptist, and the importance of him during Advent.
He's one of my favorite figures, Dan. He's spoken of and by the prophets. By the prophet Isaiah, he speaks of him as the voice in the wilderness, right? So the prophets not only talk about Jesus, they talk about the last prophet. So St. John the Baptist is the last prophet. He's like the bridge between the Old and the New Testament. Real central figure.
It's amazing how he comes to play here, really almost from the beginning, as we talked about a few weeks ago, right, with Mary seeing Elizabeth.
Yeah, and that's the last we hear of him until 30-something odd years later, our Lord Jesus gets out of the carpentry shop and goes to the Jordan River to be baptized. And that's where St. John makes his great appearance in, making this transition of the people of Israel to meet Christ, the Messiah. John's whole point is the Messiah is going to come and he's going to make things right. And at the same time, John thought like an Old Testament prophet. He's like, the Messiah is going to come and burn up the bad guys and make the good guys have their own kingdom, right? And so he first starts getting a little confused when Jesus gets in line to get baptized with all the sinners. And in this week, we're discussing the whole theme of trust. St. John the Baptist was not exempt from having to exercise trust.
Right, because he's seeing the juxtaposition of him baptizing the Lord.
Right, and he didn't have it all figured out either. So what's our Lord tell him? He says, John, trust me in this one. As he says, let it be so to fulfill all righteousness. So John says, okay, I don't know how this works out, but I trust you. And he baptizes Jesus. And later on, St. John ends up in jail because he tells off King Herod for his immoral lifestyle, and Herod puts him in jail. And then it gets worse from there.
And so in this very busy time of the holidays, with so much going on, where we have to trust that preparing our family, preparing our heart is the right thing to do during the Advent season, when there's just so much pressure to do everything else. I've got a bulb out on top of the roof, Father. I got to, Rudolph is not blinking, my man, and I got to get up there. But really, we're talking about trust and doing the right thing.
It is. Because, adversity is going to come. And the burnt out light bulb is, at the end of the day, a small thing to worry about. But we have to know how to focus, because, if our Lord doesn't spare St. John the Baptist, as he says, the greatest man born of woman, wow, from adversity and confusion, well then we're not going to be spared either. And so I like to think of him, in that moment when he's in jail, and he sends, so to speak, a telegram to Jesus asking, are you the Messiah? Are you for real? Or is this just a mistake on my part? And so Christ says, well, look at the evidence. Look at all the people I've cured, and blessed are you if you're not finding a stumbling block in me, if you're able to trust me to the end.
We're in the third week of Advent. We're so glad you joined us, and don't go away. There's a lot more to come right here on Why We Worship.
One of the best Advent practices is looking into the characters of those who are present at that first Christmas. Remember that the whole Old Testament is a gearing up. It's a getting ready for Jesus to come. And we have so much to learn from the attitudes, the experiences, and the drama of those people who were there when it happened, when Jesus was born. So as a practice, gather the kids around the kitchen table, open up the gospel, and have them read just one little passage of the Christmas story and talk about it. Let's now look at a couple of those Christmas characters, starting with the three kings. The three wise men, first of all, they came from far away. They're not associated with the average Jew at all. So they're just checking out astronomy, star charts of the skies, etc. And they thought, well, something looks kind of interesting up there. There seems to be some star alignment that shows up in the prophecies that the king of the East is to be born. So they start off on a journey, following some